All right, so ever since Democrats significantly underperformed in the House and Senate in the November 2020 elections, there have been a series of post-mortem analyses that have been given from all across the political spectrum, whether it's on Fox, whether it's leftist pundits like myself on YouTube, or whether it's coming from liberal media outlets like MSNBC. And a lot of the narratives that were being pushed on outlets like MSNBC and by shows like Morning Joe, which I'm about to show you a clip from, were just completely wrong, where they were essentially trying to throw all of the blame on progressives, even though it was centrist blue dog Democrats who lost and underperformed in that election. They were trying to cast all of the blame onto progressives, of course, because what else would they do? They don't have any ability to take responsibility or do any self-analysis, and so we're going to have to do it for them here. But I have another clip of Joe Scarborough still has not learned a single lesson from that election season and is still pushing these same bullshit talking points that corporate Democrats were pushing after they underperformed. And even Sean Patrick Maloney here, who is the head of the DCCC, was having to push back on some of these narratives because it really is, they're just throwing out Republican talking points here. I mean, this is corporate media for you through and through. I think it's a perfect example because it's not only important to understand why you lost, but it's important to understand why you lost so that you don't lose in the future, right? I mean, if you can't even do a serious self-reflecting analysis of what went wrong, then you're probably going to be likely to make the same mistakes. So let's go ahead and hear the stupidity coming out of Joe Scarborough's mouth and what Sean Patrick Maloney had to say, and then we're going to talk more about it afterwards.
A couple of quick things, and forgive me for repeating the same question, but maybe I need to say it a different way. Do Democrats support defunding the police, first of all? And secondly, the Cook Political Report said that Democrats lost 25 of 25 contested House races in 2020. And I think most analysis believe that, at least in the House races, Democrats badly underperformed expectations. So address those two. And again, if you could specifically answer the question, and again, it's not the question that I'm asking, it's a question that Republicans will continue to ask. Do Democrats support defunding the police?
Right. The answer is no. And you are asking the question, and you're repeating a Republican talking point for reasons I don't know.
Let me tell you why.
I'm trying to answer your question, Joe.
Excuse me. I'll tell you why I'm repeating it, because you all did such a damn poor job of answering that, such a poor job of answering socialism questions, such a poor job about answering cancel culture questions. That's why I'm repeating it, because if you believe that Kevin McCarthy should be Speaker of the House, keep pretending that none of that happened and keep saying that the House did a good job in 2020, because they did not. House Democrats did a poor job. So my question is, are you going into 2022 with eyes wide open?
Right. So as my friend Maxine Waters said to Jim Jordan, you're ranting again. But here's, if you'll allow me to answer your question.
If you don't really
can I answer the question? Can I answer the question?
If you don't really care whether Democrats win or not in 2022, okay, let our viewers know that.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I mean, listen, so from start to finish there, all of that was complete horseshit, okay? The questions that he's asking there, first of all, the three things that he mentioned, the three major things that he mentioned as to why Joe Scarborough thinks that Democrats lost. And first of all of these questions have already been answered. The first question that he asked there was, do you support defunding the police? Do Democrats support defunding the police? And he very simply and very concisely responds with, no. He says, no, they don't. And guess what? No, they don't. I actually am somebody who supports defunding the police and reallocating those resources towards more effective community programs. The Democratic Party does not support that. They simply don't. You can count on your hand the amount of Democrats in Congress who support defund the police. Maybe Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, a couple others maybe you could add to that list. So for Joe Scarborough to continue, this is what he means by you're just pushing Republican talking points, because this question has been answered. It has been answered, and Democrats have been on the wrong side of it. I disagree with them, but it has been answered. It has been clearly answered. And so if you're still asking this question over and over again, you're just doing some of the legwork for Republicans who are trying to paint Democrats and fearmonger about defund the police by misinforming their constituents as to what that actually means. And Democrats are playing right into their hands by not having the gut, not having the ability to stand up and actually make the positive case for basic policy solutions like defund the police. I think he should be coming out and making the positive case, because the way that you address these bullshit allegations that come from Republicans, whether it's Democrats support defund the police, Democrats support socialized healthcare, all of this radical stuff, the way that you combat the radical socialist Democrat narrative is by actually just explaining the simplicity of what the policies actually mean. Whether it's socialized medicine, okay, well then explain the problems with our current for-profit privatized healthcare system, and then go into explanations as to how a single-payer system has worked all across the world and how it could produce a better and more efficient system than our current one. Go into the policy explanation and justify it. Go in and actually describe it to the people, and then once you actually describe it, believe it or not, they actually support us on most of these progressive policy issues. The overwhelming majority of the American people support Medicare for all. The overwhelming majority of American people support a $15 minimum wage. They support canceling student debt. They support free public college. They support ending the wars. All of these different things are extremely, extremely popular among the American people. But Joe Scarborough phrases this as if the only thing that exists in this entire conversation can be, oh, you're a radical socialist or you're not. And he expects them to just walk this line of saying, oh, we're not radical socialists, I promise, please stop calling us that. That's a waste of time. That's not an effective way to win elections, by just going out there and repeatedly saying, please don't call us socialists, stop calling us socialists. No, in order to win an election, what do you have to do? I mean, let's get down to the fundamentals here. You have to earn the votes of your constituents. And so the first process, and maybe this is radical of me, but I think the first process in winning an election is simply listening to what your constituents want and then going and fighting relentlessly for those policy initiatives. That's how you win an election. But these people think the way that you win an election is by full speed sprinting away from every single Republican attack ad instead of just explaining how stupid their attack ads are in the first place. So it's an incredibly weak mindset, actually, that Joe Scarborough is espousing here. Because what he's basically doing is saying Democrats have no hope to actually advance any progressive policy agenda, or else the big bad Republicans are just going to come and call us scary socialist names. I mean, it's honestly pathetic. But again, he's right in saying that he's just pushing Republican talking points, because these questions have been answered, and the Democratic Party is not a socialist party. I wish it was. I'm a socialist, but they're not a socialist party. You have Joe fucking Biden, a moderate Republican, sitting at the top of the ticket. And so they're obviously not a socialist party. But let's get into some more of the details here, because as AOC pointed out, every single swing seat House Democrat who endorsed Medicare for all won re-election or is on track to win re-election. Every single one. So you're simultaneously saying that progressives are to blame for swing district underperformance, while if you actually look at the data, the people who won their elections were the people who supported these progressive policies. So it's just you have to twist yourself into a pretzel to think this way, to think that it is progressives' fault, even though progressives overperformed compared to centrists. And you will never, ever, ever in your entire life see Joe Scarborough bring on a centrist Democrat, a corporate Democrat, and ask them about their strategies. You will never have him ask them basic questions like, hey, where did your campaign go wrong legitimately? What was wrong with the strategies that you were using? Where did you fail to advocate for policies on behalf of improving people's material conditions so that they would vote for you? You would never, ever in a million years hear him ask these same questions or put the same amount of pressure from the left. It only ever comes from the right, and that's because he's a Republican. But this is the type of data that you need to be looking at. Progressives overperformed. Progressive policies overperformed. It was the centrist ideology that failed. And we see this emblematic within the Democratic Party because these people always fail upwards. I mean, Jamie Harrison is a perfect example here. He ran a campaign against Lindsey Graham. He got thwomped, 55% to 44. He didn't terribly perform, but he didn't even come close to winning. We can say that. And this guy, Jamie Harrison, is now the head of the DNC. He's the chairman of the DNC. So this is what happens in the Democratic Party. Even if you are a corporate Democrat and you fail utterly to win an election or actually advance power or policy agenda for the Democrats, you can fail along those lines and you'll fail upwards if you represent the corporate agenda, because that's what the establishment wants. They want to protect that ideology, this same policy agenda, this neoliberalism that they have been pushing for years. And so you fail upwards in the Democratic Party when you fail to win elections. And so that's emblematic just by somebody like Jamie Harrison, but this goes across the board. This happens all the time. And then this also plays into how they're going to run their strategies for 2022. And I think they're going to fail, okay, because they clearly, obviously, didn't learn the lesson from this past election cycle. And I know Sean Patrick Maloney was pushing back on that, but again, he wasn't pushing back on it from the right angle. He was pushing back on it in the sense that you're just repeating Republican talking points. He wasn't pushing back on it in the sense that, okay, now I'm going to flip this on you and actually advocate for these popular policies. And House Democrats moved to yoke GOP to QAnon. They can do QAnon or they can do college-educated voters. They cannot do both. So, I mean, this is a strategy that we talked about a while ago. I made a video on it of how Democrats are going to be basically focusing on trying to tie the Republican Party to the QAnon movement. instead of just trying to fight for progressive policies. I think this is a gigantic mistake. And I think that they're going to underperform, and I think they're going to lose in 2022 at this rate. You have to actually just improve people's material well-being. You have to improve their material conditions. It's not that complicated. Politics really isn't that complicated. It's only complicated if you're corrupt. It's only complicated if you have competing interests in your agenda, whether that be corporate donors or whether that be your actual constituents. That's the only way that politics becomes complicated, is if you are corrupt and you're not actually fighting for the agenda of the American people. But this is the type of thing that they're going to be running on. They're going to be trying to push. And by the way, this is the ridiculous nature of this entire campaign strategy. So here's what they think. The Democratic Party thinks Republicans can do QAnon, or they can do college-educated voters. They cannot do both. This is wrong. They can do both. In fact, the most prominent conservative pusher of QAnon conspiracies, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is unfortunately from my home state of Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene is a college-educated person. Okay, so to make this dichotomy as if everybody who believes in QAnon is not a college-educated person is wrong, and it's wrong in a very obvious and clear way. But this is the type of strategy that they're going to be pushing. Obviously, I think the real legitimate strategy to win in 2022 is to run on popular policies like Medicare for all, canceling student debt. These are things that even Biden has the ability to do right now before 2022 to remind voters what they stand for. And I think there are some other things Democrats are going to run on. They're going to run on things like the stimulus check and saying, well, we're the ones who brought you this direct relief. I think that can work to an extent, but I don't think that as the time that 2022 rolls around, people are even going to be remembering that as much, because, you know, it was a one shot of adrenaline and it didn't have any repeating programs other than maybe the child tax credit, but we'll find out on that. And it was just a one shot of adrenaline. So I don't think that's a viable strategy. You have to actually advance policies that the overwhelming majority of the American people want. And you can't keep having this ridiculous, stupid mindset that people like Joe Scarborough have.